All right, good evening. So it's mid-year budget update time, and we're going to go through the slides that were in your packages, but more importantly, the detail for the general fund as well as each individual special revenue fund that is in Novus, available to the public as well as in your board packets before the weekend. So just briefly, for the general fund, I like to start out as a reminder, especially for those that might be viewing from home, that the general fund accounts for the district's core operations, and that includes general education, special education, the non-center programs, that is, and then preschool through 12th grade and beyond, including up to 26 years old for our special education students, which is our prep program housed here at Booth. In the general fund, when we start on the revenue side and look at funding sources, we continue to be very reliant on the state for the majority of our revenue, about 70% of it this year. And it is a foundation allowance per pupil amount that is set annually through the state's budget process times enrollment, and that enrollment is in full-time equivalents, or FTEs. The budget that the board adopts for this year had to be adopted and approved by July 1st of 2021, so that happened, and now we're presenting mid-year revisions, and then you will be seeing me bring final revisions along with next year's budget in just a short couple of months. This year, what is significant is the fourth bullet, where the funding gap was closed. So when Proposal A was enacted in the mid-90s, the whole idea was to look at the lowest funded districts and the highest funded and slowly close that gap. Over the years, that sometimes resulted in what was referred to as a 2X formula, where the lowest funded districts received twice as much of an increase in that foundation per pupil as the highest funded, which would be Bloomfield. But now that that has closed, there is a target foundation, and that's the language being used right now, of 8,700. So all districts receive 8,700, but that doesn't include the hold harmless portion that we're fortunate that our community has approved. And this year, I'm not sure that it would be very obvious to any taxpayer, but we actually haven't, since over a decade ago, a certain part of budget line was eliminated, removing that portion of funding, and we have not been receiving what would be the equivalent of the target foundation for over a decade. So now that the state has closed that gap, everyone's getting 8,700. We're actually getting 8,700, the full target, and that's about $119 more than we would have in the past decade plus. And now the amount that our taxpayers pay for the hold harmless portion has been lowered by that $119. So that actually resulted in an adjustment to the millage rate in September compared to what I had projected in the spring before that came about. On the next slide, I typically don't present this at mid-year, but I did this time because of the change that I just described. And so this is typically something that happens during the public hearing in June, and now I'm just providing the update because on that second line where it says primary residence exemption property, that's basically our hold harmless. It is 6.1085, and that was a 0.1943 decrease as a result of what I described. And it's all there. These will be on the website. So the fine print, I usually put more words than what is best practice in a PowerPoint, just so we can put it on the website, and there's a little bit more explanation for anyone that's going looking. So back to the general fund as an overview. The original budget started out with about $22.5 million, which is the audited fund balance, and then landing on a projection of about a $2.6 million loss. The mid-year budget improves that slightly, and I'll take you through a crosswalk of both revenue and spending, and now the loss is projected at 2.2. What's going to be different and has actually resulted in a tremendous amount of work, but also a lot of excitement over the collaboration that Carrie described. We are meeting sometimes almost weekly based on a lot of the requirements that have come our way. So here is a pie chart of the revenue by source. I had mentioned the foundation is the majority, and that is also locally and state funded. And so before I go to the next slide, that's actually a better pie depiction. I want to call your attention to some of the notes on the right. Because of the one-time funding since March of 20 and the shutdown, where we weren't sure where we'd be from a funding standpoint, of course, grants have come along, including ESSER funding and the American Rescue Plan. So these are the amounts that are specifically in this mid-year revenue total, and that's about $3.9 million. This slide is just taking that foundation allowance and breaking it out to show that the local and state portions are about a 50-50 mix of that total foundation. And then we have state categorical grants, which have actually grown a bit, that green 16%. And some of that, it'll be interesting to see how the budget for next year, that my head's starting to go towards next year in the governor's budget and seeing what happens. So I have to stay in this year right now. So let's look at a crosswalk of the original budget projection for revenue to the mid-year, and some of that, actually a lot of it, is going to be as grant applications opened. There have been significant delays even just with our normal grant cycle because of a change in systems at the state level. I think also probably staffing shortages and capacity, absorbing all of these other requirements with the monies that are available. So that is a lot of the change. But starting with that $94.5 million number at the top, we did decrease our investment income from what we projected by about $150,000. I think we all see the writing on the wall there. Market rates are really not recovering as we had hoped. The foundation allowance is the biggest chunk, $2.2 million almost of a revenue loss. And that's a combination of the enrollment decline and also less than projected revenue, not only foundation allowance, but there was a push for some declining enrollment funding. So the combination of that was budgeted about $200 per pupil, and we ended up with $171. But on the enrollment very quickly, I think it's important to remember that back in the shutdown year, those pupil count, all the count days already occurred, and our funding was established, and our membership was established, our FTEs. And those FTEs were 5,555. Real easy number for me to remember, it's all fives. And then during the pandemic, just like every school district and the state, everyone experienced a significant decline during that pandemic year. The state recognized that during the 2021 school year, and actually took and placed a super blend calculation to protect at least the revenue for districts. And so we didn't recognize that revenue loss last year. We were saved by quite a bit. And I know I had details in the board update, so now I don't want to get too fuzzy on the numbers. But I think I have a note there about the super blend. And then this year, in the original budget, we projected a recovery from what actually happened that didn't come to fruition. So we absorbed the entire pandemic year loss of about 177 FTEs, along with an additional loss this year, and I want to say it was about 40-ish. So that entire amount is now being realized or recognized as the revenue loss this year. That is really, really significant. And typically, there's only one other time in my whole almost 11 years that I've been here, we had a significant enrollment drop that we did not expect. And it coincided with having the high school on 2 campuses. Don't know if that was the primary driver or not, but we were really scrambling with budget balancing actions. This year, with COVID and the pandemic and our student needs, we were not looking to reduce staff and increase class sizes or not provide support. So the cost savings did not happen because our students had needs. So social workers were added, and a lot of this was done before we had even realized how much ESSER money would be coming our way, or if we're eligible, and what kind of cost supply. We really focused on students. So my point is, revenue went down by a significant amount. and we did not have an expenditure drop to match that. Then we had the other large one on here is Public Act 18, which is the countywide tax. There were two pieces to that $881,000, which was an additional distribution as well as our share of the county's cost increase compared to what was originally projected, which happens. There's always a look back that the county does and then trues up based on everyone's actual cost and what the pro rata share is. On the next page, this is page 2 of 3 of the crosswalk, the largest portion on here is the retirement system. And the first number on there, $1.5 million of an increase. It's important to know that this is offset by expenses as well. So this is the UAAL portion of the rate, the unfunded actuarial liability of 1.5. It's a significant increase, so it increases our total revenue, increases our total spending, and that's going to be that way for a little while, and the amount varies. Then there was a small adjustment related to some of the other sections, and I provided a little more explanation than I have before because MIPSRS has many components.
Tina,
yeah.
what percent is the retirement plan underfunded by?
Oh, now that one I'd have to look up. I don't know, I'd have to look. And they have an annual report, it's online. I'm focused more on the percent we're contributing, but I don't know what the unfunded percent is. Okay. I do know, based on all of the reforms, that it'll be in the 2035, 38. Thank you. That this is expected to level out. Good question. I'll try to remember to look that up. And other than that, I'm going to go to the next page. So most of the other changes are actually positives in revenue. Most of these grants that are listed are offset by an equal amount of costs because most of these grants are reimbursement based. So we don't get the monies in advance. And the largest ones there are the ESSER. So the ESSER 2 that you see in revenue, the $1.2 million, most of that when we get to the spending side will have been the retention bonuses that were part of the bargained contracts approved last year. We did receive child care stabilization grants to offset operating costs as well as staff stipends, specific amount for staff stipends, which was great news. I credit our preschool manager for really seeking out these opportunities, and we were awarded. So in total, the net revenue increase from original budget to midyear is almost $3 million, and it was about 3.2% of an increase. So $97.5 million is our total revenue projection for this year. What is not included in here is about $800,000 of the first part of ESSER 3, which is referred to as part of the formula grant. And that we have time to spend that anyway. And then also ESSER 311T, sometimes referred to as equalization. This is the one where if it's going to trigger you, it'll be that every district's going to receive about $1,093 per pupil. And for those districts that didn't, usually those that don't have higher numbers of at-risk or marginalized student groups didn't receive that, are going to have that gap filled with federal funding. But I'll get to a little catch on that has a lot of legislators and school officials upset because it's very restricted.
So I'm sorry, Tina, are we getting that $1,100 per pupil or not?
Yes, the federal government, it was finally approved on October 8th, again, the delays, and every district will receive at least $1,093 per pupil. And so that does include us, and it equates to about $4.9 million in this section.
That's not on the previous
It is
slide.
not included
Okay.
in the mid-year budget.
Okay.
It's reimbursement based. So when we spend it and there's an expenditure, there will be a revenue to match as long as we get it within 60 days of year end. So Since the shutdown, year to year, it's really hard to compare now because there are those governmental accounting rules that I know Howard loves, that, you know, if you don't get it in time, then it's not revenue. Your spending was last year, your revenue's this year. So we're actually looking at it as a group of years in a way. It's really hard to do a lot of analytical trending the way things have been working since the shutdown. So on the spending side is just broken down with the majority, of course, about $84 million for salaries and benefits or staffing. Keep in mind, this does not include contracted staffing. These are our employees. And the $49 million is about 49% in salaries, and the benefits are about $35 million. Before I get to the next slide, because I added a new one on the benefits, there are the fine print again on the right, which says the mid-year expenditures has about $2.6 million of one-time monies. And that there's a list there of what those would be. I also did a little note on the outgoing tuition because that's been a question that comes up. And outgoing tuition would be our students attending IA, Wing Lake, DHH, as well as other district special education programs. And one of the crosswalks will show what I look at as the special education redesign that's been going on now for a few years. And we're really trying to bring our students back in to be served by BHS. So our outgoing tuition did decrease. Before I get to the crosswalk, here's a breakdown of those benefits. So about $35 million in benefits. And someone might say on $49 million of salaries, what is included in that? So this breakdown shows the significant portion related to the retirement system, and it further breaks down those retirement costs into what our district cost is, that yellow section, $13 million, and then the gray pie is the portion that the state funds. So it's an in and out with no net impact. Moving on to the crosswalk. A couple of pages for the crosswalk, starting with the $97 million in the original budget. The staff compensation increased with the retention bonuses that when we adopted the original budget, everything wasn't all approved, so it was just a matter of not getting in there on time. And then we, of course, have that UAAL funding that we saw on the revenue side increase, and this is the spending side increase. All of our other fringe benefits in total were a decrease of about $764,000. Bloomfield Virtual was funded mostly by ESSER monies, and that again increased. And then we also had a little bit of American Rescue Plan monies coming through the county for IDEA, and so that is staffing that was paid by that grant. So some of this was on the revenue side and now is on the spending side. In the supply area, there was considerable savings, over $800,000 just on the textbooks where we didn't have large curriculum adoptions. We weren't sure conservatively on the finance side. We put in an estimate there, but that won't happen this year. And then for operating supplies, including PPE and everything else, we did have inventory remaining. Coming back in person, we were fine. Instructional supplies, however, did increase because we were in person in the classroom all year this year. On the purchase services side, so staffing is important here too because we do have contracted staffing. Our custodial, back in person all school year, the needs to take care of the buildings, the teacher substitutes, yes, there is a teacher shortage, including substitutes, but we found some and the cost did increase there. Obviously, we're in person. And then we do have the addition of the administrator of public safety that is in the mid-year budget, as well as some contracted coaches that increased that particular line by about $422,000. Conferences and travel is happening again. A lot of it is still being offered virtually, but some of it is travel related compared to where we thought we might be. And other than that, that brings us to about $2.6 million of an expenditure increase, or 2.6%. So not too far off from the percent increase on the revenue side. A few notes, actually many notes, and the most important of this, well, one, positive news, right? We really like to gravitate towards positive news whenever possible. And the January Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference reported extremely favorable revenue projections, both for the state general fund, general purpose, and the school aid fund. The governor's budget that was released recently is very education friendly. And I'm even hearing from some of the meetings I'm in that would have connections with what's going on in Lansing. I'm very excited to wait and see the House and the Senate budgets. I'm hearing that the foundation increase that was proposed by the governor may be even greater by the next two. I'm not sure. So that is very, very good news, including the additional categoricals in specific areas that really support our students. And also the governor is looking at the School Finance Research Collaborative and following along with that in many ways as far as percent increases for those student groups that need more support. And then the last half of that page is really all about, Jennifer, you asked about receiving that 1,093 per pupil, and that's what this refers to. So that application that was approved on October 8th, the end date to obligate funds is September 30th of 2024. And what was negotiated between the state and the feds in order to use federal money, unlike where they did something similar with ESSER 2, and they said everyone will get $450 per pupil, they used state money for that. The state used state money. Now we're using federal money. So there was a negotiation that took place, and the restriction that's been placed on this is every single dollar must be spent to affect students in these groups, and the quotes is part of a Michigan Department of Education memo. So we've not only been spending a lot of time with the Learning Services team on the finance side, but we've also been spending time with the Michigan Department of Education. There are a couple key contacts in particular, one especially that's been extremely responsive, and we're very appreciative, meeting with us just individually with Bloomfield to make sure as we talk about what we're planning to do and how we think we're interpreting what we can do to support these students that we're on the right track. And what's very important is meaningful consultation with stakeholders. And that can come in a lot of forms. A survey doesn't do it by itself, but gathering everything going back from the fall, board meetings, public comment, the MyKIP stakeholder meeting that did take place recently too. We're gathering all of that as support, that we're taking that input, and that input is going into our plan, including what you have all discussed at the board table. So there are a lot of requirements, and we're just told to be prepared to be audited years from now. So we're making sure we have the documentation there, and then there's certain percentages you see on what has to be, not only for those students, but in these particular categories. So summer programs are planned. They were anyway. That doesn't mean we're going to have a summer program only for any one of these groups. But it's a massive spreadsheet that we're envisioning to start capturing cost, figuring out which students are in a summer program or a summer class related to that teacher's cost, and start doing the math and then seeing where it fits. So, from our last meeting, we're in a favorable position. We have a long way to go. It is a lot of work, but can't ignore the positive that it's money that's really needed to serve our students' needs. On the next page, I always like to show the board policy, and this becomes very important, especially in June when you're adopting the next year's budget. But recently, because the board, you all have approved the bond resolution for the refinancing, and then tonight the $20 million, what comes along with that, and I'll provide updates as I have them, is Moodys rating call and our bond rating. And so this particular policy factors into that discussion that I have with them as well. Yes.
Sorry, I know it was in the update. When are we going to find out the rating? You said in a few weeks, maybe?
Well, fresh and hot off the press, and I guess you won't have an update from me today. I couldn't actually disclose it till it went public. The press release did go public without the credit, and we have maintained our double A1. And given our enrollment decline especially, it really is looking at all of the funds. They have a whole new methodology, so it's required a lot more time going through the longer report that's not out yet. But yes, that was very good news.
Really good news, Tina. How many districts have that already?
I'm waiting to find that out. Because I think I know, but it's not, it's not official. And, yeah.
Well, great
So,
job.
yeah, no, it's teamwork, it's collective effort. Takes a village. Special revenue funds include all the funds listed at the bottom. Most know which ones those are: International Academy Center Program, Recreation, Community Services, Food Services, Hills Activities, and Co-Curricular Endowment. Each of those individually were in your board package, but combined, I'm presenting them here in a slide. They still have a net positive for the year, and each fund's doing well. And I'll point out, even the food service fund, we're capped on how much fund balance we can have in there, and we knew that it was going very well, but what that allows us to do is look at everything that food services needs, and if they really needed their new vehicle recently, their new food delivery truck, and that's wrapped nicely. So that came out of the food service fund, and then there's something else that's coming up, and we may even be able to divert some of the kitchen food service equipment from the bond to the food service fund too. All right, so the rest I will be very quick. It's trends. Again, keep in mind those trends are a little more difficult now year over year because we're seeing more timing differences with grant revenue matching expenses, as well as what's in the fine print there is the amount of the MIPSers, the UAAL amount that has grown since 12-13 when it came into being. To this year, and you can see sometimes there are big increases, sometimes there were some decreases, so that also can throw it, but it is a real cost. Enrollment trends. So we spent some time on this. I really tried to blow it up and explain it at the bottom, but the total enrollment is in blue. The green is the general fund only, and then the difference represents the center program funds, which is in a separate fund. So that decline is significant, and that is something that we will be working with the projection when Mr. Wills presents to us next month, I think. Fund balance data and the percent of fund balance, because that's important. What the policy is presented here just in a graph form where the bars represent the dollars and then the line represents the percent. And then the last slide is this, which now that the gap has closed, it doesn't really remove the fact that increases to the foundation allowance have far from kept up with inflation, using a state and local government price deflator here. And so I've collapsed some of the levels, but comparing that minimum foundation back 94-95 when Proposal A came into being, the cumulative increase in the foundation for those districts was 107% in that top section all the way to the right. And then in purple, Bloomfield Hills Schools, cumulative percent change all the way to the right was 20%. So it's just a very drastic difference, and the gap is closed. That is wonderful, but doesn't remove how much things have not kept up. And the last slide is just snippets of the website. There is a lot that's on there under the finance pages and in the transparency section as well. So hopefully I did not speak too fast. I felt like I did.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.